tools that have been extracted out of the ground here. In fact, I found a medieval stone splitter just a couple of weeks ago in the metal detector. Still finding loads of stuff down in our metal detectors. So some of the axes and the chisels and the picks that they used to use, and the saws. There's one over on the wall there. I'll point out now.
Oh yeah.
You know, there's not much that I wouldn't shy away from a day's work, but I don't really fancy wielding that all day long, to be honest. And it looks to me like it could possibly be a one-man saw. It's only got one handle at one end, and it's you imagine swinging that all day. But anyway, when they actually cut the stone using these saws and picks, I'll explain more on how they actually removed the stone and lifted it, and with crane and that. But when we're a bit further back, you couldn't get straps under the stone. You couldn't lift a 3-ton block back then to get any ropes under or any straps to lift it. So they used a thing called a Freemason's Lewis. These are small bars, but these have all been found in here. Obviously, that's a lot bigger one, which would have lifted a lot bigger block of stone. We've had this. It's easier to do a demonstration on, really. And what they do after they cut the block, they attached it from the floor using the sedimentary line. They didn't cut the bottom, they'd actually hammer a peg in and it'd kind of pop the block up and attach it. They cut a hole in the top to mirror, if you can see, it kind of does that. Now what they do is they cut a slot into the block with their chisels, but they taper it down. And they take their Lewis, big one or small one, they take the nut and bolt out, and they put the two side bits in first, so they move them into the slots in the side which they made, or into the tapers, and then they put the middle one in, which will be a nice tight fit like it is now, put it all back together, and then of course you've got a lifting point, because you can't pull the taper through the hole. That would have been in the day, like a mason would have kept that top secret. You know, when he was fixing this into the top of the block, he wouldn't want anyone to see that. It would have been quite a secretive thing that they would have used and done. It would have been kept like wrapped up in a cloth or something. They wouldn't want anyone to see this. It's like, you know what it's like. This actually, up until recently, was believed to be a Roman design, believe it or not. Now, but evidence recently is suggested that the Romans actually pinched it from the Greeks. So this has been around for some years. And you see that church window over here. The Romans kind of stopped here. They honeycombed all the entrances up and down, quite close to the mine entrances. I think they were kind of wise, really, or they were cautious. The Romans disappeared somewhere between 380 and 420 AD. You know, the Anglo-Saxons. There was a lot of kings and queens and Viking raids and stuff going on for several hundreds of years. It was quite England was in turmoil at the time, you know, there was all sorts going on. So not a lot of building got done, but they did still extract stone in the Dark Ages. Anglo-Saxons actually, it's just there where you can see pretty much as far as you can see before you turn and go back deeper. This is pretty much all that the Anglo-Saxons mined out. I think they were more intent on fighting and scrapping and conquering and raiding than they actually were building churches and buildings. But that all changed when the Normans
Can't see anything. No, I can't.
Would you expect them to be so kind of...
Trying to look out for a bat. Yeah.
There was two different types of workers in these caves that worked here at any one time. One supported the other. You had your masons who were shaping the stone after it had been cut by the labourers who would be sawing and chopping the blocks. Once the blocks were chopped and moved towards the front of the cave here, the masons would take over and start cutting it and chipping it and shaping it into shapes ready to be exported wherever it was used, like I say. Now, the labourers underground, they had to buy their candles before they came down here. No matter what happened, they had to pay for their candles. They weren't skilled, they were just labourers. So they used to charge them for the candles. But the masons, they were given as many candles as they needed a day. They needed the light to see, the carve. We didn't need much light to just sort of walk out the ground, dim light. You can imagine it was very dim back then. They would have hardly seen what was going on. Find a hole for the sword, get it and work. Tallow candles, well, we know this spot here was used by the masons, would have been in here, or one of the spots, I'll show you some more. You can see the old tallow candle marks on the wall, and they used to put candles up quite close to the ceiling. You'd think, why don't we put them down here, you know, they'd be better light. But in fact, the higher they put them, the more reflection they got off the roof, which kind of illuminated it better for them, rather than having them lower down. And they'd attach them to the wall, they'd reach into any of these cracks and scoop out some clay wherever they could, because there was plenty of cracks and clay in around here, just come down through the fault lines over the years. And they'd swap it all up with clay on the wall, and that's how they actually attach their candles to the wall. Anyway, carry on with that. Actually, it's tracery, but it was used here to carve the window for Colleton Church in the 14th century. This was actually made in the 14th century, underground here, before Columbus even got to America. So we didn't know America existed when this was made. It was used, after it was disused, we found parts of it lying around here and there and reconstructed it here. But this is a copy, not a copy, a tracery of what they used when they made a new window for Colleton Church. When I say why the reason the tracery is here, they actually used to work on the stone below ground because it remained kind of moist and wet. When you actually take beer stone out from this cool, damp kind of environment, it dries, it hardens, and it goes a slightly creamy yellow colour, and not like the white it is today. It stays nice and white down here. When if you look at Beer Church and some of the buildings around the village, it actually looks like the stone's a bit yellow. Well, actually, it's beer stone. It's the same, but it's just weathered and it takes on its appearance. You can see this wheelbarrow. You have a job push that without anything in it, I think. They must have been strong old people back then. Some of the things that have been carved out of beer stone here, the garden figurehead things. This here, I don't know if anyone this is a lot of isn't it? Anyone hazard a guess at what this here might have been? I know it's a bit irrelevant to mine, really, but that was actually used for making lead weights for fishermen years ago. And they just put the wires in the bottom and fill these little recesses up with lead. But anyway, which was packed and popped on the train overseas and used to end up on the London market. And this is what happened down here in the Second World War. It was basically a big grove sort of system.
Perfect bunker.
Actually, the caves that we were talking about on the other side of the road, now they're more modern. They've all been carved out. There's 25 acres over the road, you see, in the modern quarry.
That's closed though, isn't it?
Huh?
It is closed though, isn't it?
It is closed,
It's just under security,
Now, the caves over there, these caves, as we walk to the back of the caves, were actually beer tilted at some point in history. The sediment, like the plate that beer is on, it tilted, whether it's dipping under something else or what. And the reason we know that is the layers of flint you can see when you look at the cliffs from the beach. They're not straight. The layers of flint do that. And the whole of the seam of beer stone which they've been mining actually goes like that as well. And that's why the caves are cold. The side of the road are quite warm, and these over here are quite cold. And actually, the backs prefer the cold because it holds a kind of more constant temperature. Over the road, it fluctuates, and they don't like it. Again, more kind of capital L's. There's another capital L. This what you see here, where you see it's been picked out all around each side, and then you see a smooth face. Well, that was kind of medieval laziness. What they did, they didn't want to go right to the back of the caves and cut stone out, so they robbed the pillars. We call it pillar robbing. And there's several spots around here. There's another spot just there. that's been pillar wall. You see it's been sawn out. And here, pickaxe, pillars, but they've actually cut stone at a later date out of the pillars. But even though they've done that, everything down here is still all in mining and building regulations. What I mean is gaps between. They knew back then what was safe before it was even discovered in more modern times what was safe. This area here, you see, when we came in that entrance to the right, you saw another cave entrance next to it, which we kind of lead through. This is Wagon Road. I was thinking how the Bearstone took it. This road, they put this here, you can see the deck that they had to come up. It's been raised quite a lot, this road here. Just there, we just walked up it there. Well, this was put here because the incline was so steep up by the entrance to the caves. The donkeys and the carts couldn't get out with the blocks of stone on because they were too heavy. So over the, just to assist the horses, so they had an easy view about this area. But I'll leave it till we get back. There's a little temperature gauge that hardly ever changes. A degree from summer to winter, and it doesn't matter how cold or how hot a summer we have. That pretty much stays much the same within 1 degree. When we cut the stone out, you see they kind of cut it out in blocks here and there. Well, how they actually got the saws in over the top to cut down, see at the back there, there's a thing called a header. That line you see there, you'll see them where all the pillars are, there's headers. We call it a header. And they're everywhere. Just there's one of the lines. There. And there. It's called a header. Now to get the saws in and get the stone out, they used to send children, child labour, in over the tops to pick out a void so high. You can see it's from there to there. That's not a very big void, just enough so you can lie in there on your side and swing a pick and pick it out. And they call it breach or breach. You breach over the top, and once they've breached over the top 1 metre or 2 metres, then they could start sawing down. And they needed enough room so they could get a saw down the back as well. And once they got the saw the sides and cut down the back, then they could put the metal pegs in the sedimentary layer, which would detach it from the bottom. Now, this has all these breaches and headers have been picked out by hand. Now, we know somewhere blocks of stone out from all back here. Like I say, what we're stood on now is nice coarse sand which we've put down. It's easy to walk on. But back when they were mining in here, and all that chalk and chalk dust that was coming out, because they would have been pouring water in just to help the saw, and it would have been horrible, like, sludgy, and they actually picked up as much dust as they could while they were, as the dust was coming out of the saw holes, like, they picked up as much dust as they could, and they docked here, there, and around the cave, certain places, because they didn't want it on the floor, because of that, it was turned into like a sludgy lime pit. And lime's not very nice, it burns, if it gets in your cuts, it irritates. It's not nice, And they used to put it all in one spot. Well, to this day now, we still get stonemasons that do specialised jobs in repairing churches and that. They still request to come underground and take bags of this away. And what they use it for is to colour the mortar when they kind of like join the sections together. They'll add it in with the mortar to give it the colour so you can't see the joins, or they don't appear so. Saws, there's all sorts of definitely they're absolutely definitely. Believe it or not, that is where the term stone death comes from. There's many miners that couldn't do it traditionally, they just didn't have the grunt in them to do it. He said, I could have been there all week, he said, I probably still would have put that block of stone out. Now, the labourers in the day were expected to produce a block of stone the size that you see every day. So they were out to work. How they actually did it with the stone, I explained about the Lewis. Well, Lewis's, they weren't used just to lift the stone up, they were used to lift themselves up as well. You can see there's like a square hole here which has been cut in the ceiling, and there's a Lewis hole next to it. Well, the Lewis hole predates that square hole there. They would have used the Lewis to attach a Lewis and a rope or a platform to keep a platform steady, so they could have carved this hole, which would have supported a huge wooden timber. Before we put this sand and that down, there was actually a hole to mirror that one directly under, and there's a channel leading into it. So they would have cut the timber, they would have made it, cut the timber, quite a beefy, probably a and located it in the ceiling, located it in the bottom hole, and then from the bottom of that, there would have been another timber, chained to the top on a pivot, and they could have lifted here. They would have, once they attached the stone, they would have carved their hole, put the Lewis in, lifted it up on the crane, swung it around where a cart would have been there, onto the cart, and it would have been taken to the front of the cave where the masons would have worked on it, or that actually some blocks were, they would have left as they were actually in block form, because not everything was carved. Sometimes you need blocks of stone to actually deal with. This is another spot, what you see, quite recent. When I say recent, this is late 18th century, pretty much what you see here. Labourers, they earn very, very little money back in the day. You know, they do 6 days a week, no one worked on a Sunday back then for religious reasons. They just didn't do it. Now, they work a 6-day week, so they used to hide their contraband in here. And when he was on the way to the cave with a cask of spirits on his back, he was carrying a cask of spirits across the field. As he was coming down through the paddock, he must have slipped. And when he's in the morning, he was found by a couple of his work colleagues in the field. He wasn't alive, he died unfortunately. He was on his back with his head pointing down. A bit of conflict in the village about the numbers, but it is a true story. In the mid-17th century, or about 1760, above they used to dig, did I explain to you about the softer chalk, which they used to dig out in the quarry above? That's why the quarry above the cave exists. They used to dig out the slightly softer limestone, and they used to put it in lime kilns. You're getting cold. Won't be long, sorry. They'd actually dig it out of the ground and they put it in lime kilns, which removed certain elements of it, and then it was good for a fertiliser. It was kind of like until modern day fertilisers came. They did a lot of lime kilns and a lot of lime digging. In the mid-17th century, round about, we had a really extremely cold winter. It was so cold for so long, the ground froze and they couldn't drive their picks into the ground. So the foreman went up to the manor house and he explained to the lord of the manor what was going on. He owned the quarries. And he said, there's absolutely no way you're down in tools. You've got to keep working, he said. He said, but how do we do it? We can't physically dig. He said, you're going to have to blast the ground. You're going to have to plant some dynamite and loosen it all up and so they can keep digging. Well, they did that. They planted the dynamite up above and they sent a lad down there because they thought it only fair that they warned the workers down here just in case something happened as they were. So they sent a boy down here, run down here and tell him to just get out, because they were going to create an explosion up above to loosen up. Anyway, whatever happened to the lad, no one really knows, but he didn't get down here in time. Whether he slipped, hurt himself while he was running, or whether an adult copped him hold or something because he wanted a word, who knows? We don't know, no one knows. But all we know is he didn't make it. They dynamited, and a quarter of a mile of tunnel, you can see that's all collapsed. That was a quarter of a mile of tunnel which headed east. There was 47 guys down there. But the numbers are debatable, but people still there. And on that story, something else I'll just add in. There's no youngsters here, is there? Not quite. Over the 37 years we've been open as an attraction, there various times throughout that 37 years, with decent gaps in between, we have had people approach the tour guide discreetly after the tour, and they've all explained the same. They believe they've seen a little boy dressed with brown trousers and a brown jacket and a little cap, and everyone that has described him exactly the same. Different tour guides, and they all say he's been in that spot there, just sat there. I haven't seen him myself yet, and I come down in the winter on my own. Whether I'm not that way, I don't know. But they do, and and everyone has explained the little boy dressed in brown, wearing a cap, and it's the same description from different people over all that time. And believe it or not, rumour has got about, and I have got Haunted Devon absolutely scrambling over themselves to get in here. In fact, later in the year, when we close as a tourist attraction, they're going to come over and I'm walking down here. You can just see there's like this hole here, and then you can actually go up around there. You can see there's like a little walkway up around there. But you can go in there and you crawl for about 10 metres, something like that. It's tight. You know, you're on your belly, you can feel the seat on your back. Right? You know, it's not pleasant. But eventually you come through and you drop down the other side, and there's another network of chambers, and it's untouched. When you actually get in there, you can still see the old boot marks of the miners on the floor. The last time John went in there, it was good to see.
Wasn't a McDonald's burger or anything like that.
Sorry?
McDonald's burger.
No, no.